Without water, there's no life. And the water is poison now. Where water used to sustain life for us, not only the animal, the plants, the fish, but us, now it's working against us. Now that it's poison, now it's going to poison us.
Hi, my name is Becky Healy, and I'm an Environment and Society and Indigenous Studies student. For my research report, I looked into high rates of cancer and other illnesses experienced by a northern community in Alberta called Fort Chipewyan. The Athabasca oil sands has been an increasingly threatening presence for the health and well-being of the community. I'll start by sharing information about the community and then about the development of the Alberta oil sands before moving on to an analysis of the health crisis through the hazard, exposure, and outcome model. Fort Chipewyan is a small community of only 918 residents, and it's extremely remote. In spring, summer, and autumn, it's only accessible by air, and in the winter, it's accessible by ice roads. The population is mainly indigenous, mostly of the Mikisew Cree First Nation, Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, and the Fort Chipewyan Métis. Land and the traditional practices and ecological knowledge that can be garnered from the land are important to the cultural and spiritual identity of the people. Both the Mikisew Cree and the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nations were involved in the signing of Treaty 8 between many First Nations and the British Crown. Treaty 8 is an agreement that is meant to protect the cultural and livelihood practices of the Indigenous nations who signed it. At the time of its creation in 1899, the First Nations ensured that Treaty 8 upheld their needs. The treaty assured the First Nations that they would be as free to hunt and fish after the treaty as they would be if they never entered it, and that their modes and livelihoods were to be undisturbed. For many reasons, these treaty rights have been violated greatly over the past 122 years, most notably perhaps by the introduction of the industrial Alberta oil sands beginning in the 1960s. The Alberta oil sands are three large deposits of bitumen, a heavy viscous crude oil, that are extracted through industrial processes. The Athabasca oil sands are the largest of the three and the most concerning for Fort Chipewyan. The Athabasca oil sands are located 250 kilometers upstream of Fort Chipewyan. The north-flowing Athabasca River connects the two locations as Fort Chipewyan lies where the river empties into Lake Athabasca. The industrial activity required to extract the bitumen from the oil sands is notoriously dirty, and is detrimental to the environment and therefore human health. Bitumen is extracted and then diluted with other chemicals that make it viscous enough to transport through pipelines. The chemicals that are added are far more dangerous to human health than the raw material. Wastewater from the extraction process is most commonly put into tailings ponds, which are large man-made bodies of water made entirely of the wastewater from industrial activity. In total, the tailings ponds in Alberta cover roughly 130 square kilometers. The ponds contaminate the air and the water with the many hazardous chemicals used for oil sands development. In my report, I examined a 2014 report done by the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, Mikisew Cree First Nation, and the University of Manitoba, titled Water is a Living Thing. This report, as well as other research that has been done, begins to uncover some of the issues that the oil sands industry in Alberta creates for the health and culture in surrounding communities. There are two main types of hazards that the oil sands industry exposes to Fort Chipewyan: heavy metals and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs for short. High levels of heavy metals such as antimony, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, mercury, and selenium are associated with oil sands mining. Animal and plant tissue was tested in Fort Chipewyan, and concerning levels of arsenic, cadmium, mercury, and selenium were found. The other greatest concern is PAHs, which are a class of chemicals that are generally created through combustion and can be dangerous to human health and even carcinogenic. In the same animal tissues tested for heavy metals, PAHs were found at worryingly high volumes. For every kilogram of tissue, 32.3 micrograms of PAHs were found. Exposure to these hazards happens in a variety of ways. People in Fort Chipewyan are exposed to contaminated air, water, and food when they inhale or ingest it. Exposure through drinking water is generally curbed by filtration systems, but it can happen when people drink unfiltered water, which is something that they should be able to do within their treaty rights. The water is contaminated by the oil sands, mainly through tailings ponds seeping into groundwater, which eventually makes it to the surface water and then travels up Lake Athabasca to Fort Chipewyan. Exposure through inhalation happens when PAHs are released into the environment from the vapor of tailings ponds or from machinery. After in the atmosphere, it enters the lungs through breathing. Traditional animal and plant foods are also exposed to these contaminated air and waters, but they cannot be protected by the same things that humans can, like water filtration. Therefore, many of the traditional foods that are so important to Fort Chipewyan culture are contaminated. While many community members now choose to not eat traditional foods because they know it's contaminated, 22.5% of participants in the study ate traditional foods for more than half of their diet. These exposures are the most concerning because the hazards can bioaccumulate in the food chain and become more concentrated. The most concerning health outcomes for community members are those that are cancerous. In 2007, the community's on-call doctor noticed heightened levels of cancer in the community. In the 2014 study, 23 of the 97 participants reported that they have experienced cancer. The community has a rate of cancer that is 30% higher than it should be. 267 other illnesses were also recorded. It is clear that Fort Chipewyan is sicker than it should be. More than cancers and other illnesses, the degradation of traditional lands is causing community members to be increasingly stressed, with 91% of participants of the study saying that they worried about their community.
It's really scary that, that you might get cancer because you're eating all these fishes and animals that are supposedly polluted. Not supposedly, they are polluted. And it's scary eating them. But that's my way of life.
There are also some confounders that shape the health outcomes of the residents in Fort Chipewyan. One confounder is the long period between the exposure to hazards and the outcome of the illness, especially for cancer, but also for other illnesses experienced in Fort Chipewyan. This makes it uncertain that the outcome is a result of any certain exposure. Social determinants like age, gender, and financial status also shape how people experience exposures and their outcomes. These confounders are important in understanding the health outcomes in Fort Chipewyan, but it is clear to the community that the source of their health issues is the oil sands industry. The controversial issue of the Alberta oil sands is causing increasing worry in and beyond surrounding communities, and policymakers must act in a way that considers environmental and human health, and not only economic prosperity and economic development.